Welcome to Dogsthorpe Infant School Launchpad.
This is your captain speaking. We've been cleared for departure.
Okay, Eddie, start the countdown.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Let's go.
This podcast is brought to you by Eddie Edster, the Dogsthorpe Infant School Wellbeing Dog.
Welcome back to Eddie's Launchpads. It's a Dogsthorpe Infant School podcast for parents, teachers and schools. Now, I have got Hilary Elder as our guest today. You may not recognise the name, but she does some fantastic work, and the work she does is going to speak to a lot of parents and carers and teachers out there. So it's great to welcome Hilary to the show. Welcome to the show, Hilary.
Thank you. It's lovely to be here.
Can you share a little bit about yourself, first of all?
Yeah, sure. So probably the most important thing to know about me is I'm very northern. I'm a borderer. I was born and raised in Carlisle, which is right next to Scotland. But it sounds Welsh, so people get very confused about us. So that's where I was born and brought up. And I was at primary school in the 1970s, so I'm very old. And I still live in the north. I live in the northeast now, in a little town north of Newcastle. So I've moved from one side of Hadrian's Wall to the other. And I have enjoyed reading and writing all my life, and it's just very exciting in the last few years to have time to do more of it and to share more of it. So I'm really enjoying this phase of my life. Other things you could know about me: I really love music. Music's been a really important part of my life all my life. I play the viola and the trombone, so I like bands rather than sitting by myself doing my music. I love being outdoors. I love knitting. I knit socks especially. I'm famous for knitting people's socks as presents. It's very exciting knitting socks, and it suits my personality because you don't get bored. There's always something different happening. And I always make mistakes, and I can never be bothered to go back and put the mistakes right. So with a sock, it's great because what you do is you try not to make the mistakes on the second sock. In fact, what happens is you make different mistakes on the second sock.
And I know that poetry is very dear to your heart, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I enjoy everything really about poetry, and I enjoy lots of different types and styles of poetry as well. So some of the things that I write are very formal. They can be sonnets and all that kind of thing, whereas some things are very free, and some things are a bit rappy, and some things are for performing, and some things are really, you have to look at them because they might be a shape poem or something like that. So I like the way you can just have fun with poetry and do anything you want.
Yeah. The interesting thing about poetry is that it conjures up, I think it conjures up different pictures in the mind than a novel does. With a novel, you're following, or with a story, if you've got a storybook or you're reading a storybook to a child, the images come into your mind as you follow these different characters. But you can travel 1,000,000 miles. It's like going through a wormhole when you listen to a poem. I always find, regardless of what sort of genre of poem it is, you suddenly find yourself going through this incredibly fast. And this journey is like a series of colours. I always think that when I've had some great poets on the Launchpad, really gifted poets, and they've shared some of their work, and I know that I'm hoping that you'll share some of your work too. And I always feel at the end of it, wow, where am I now? Because some of the poems that have taken me on this journey that's gone far, far faster than a normal story can.
Yeah, and actually I write fiction as well. And they help each other. Very often, my poems will be story poems because I love telling stories. And when you write poetry, every single word counts. And usually after you've drafted something, you take a lot out rather than adding things in. And that really helps you when you're writing fiction because it helps you to notice the stuff that doesn't need to be there. And I have actually started writing stories and novels in verse now, which I really enjoy. And there are some fantastic children's novels in verse, really wonderful stuff. And I would love to be able to do one of those, because it you would think a novel in verse would be less accessible. But in some ways, it's a very accessible way for reluctant readers because you have a lot less words on the page. There's a lot of white space. You can read a novel in verse really quite fast and nothing is wasted. So sometimes I think the length of a sentence or the number of words on a page can really put a reluctant reader off. And with a novel in verse, you don't get that.
No.
Very often you get very short lines as well. And I enjoy writing that way because it helps me get to the heart of the story if I'm using only the words I need. And it allows you to be adventurous, but it also, I think, can help readers, can be easy and fun for readers to go into that short world. But yeah, quite a lot of my poems do tell stories.
It's a fascinating subject, and I'd like us to talk about, what inspires you to write a little bit later on, and I know that you're trying to inspire people of all ages, not just adults but children as well, in their writing, which is in another thing that we need to talk about later on as the podcast continues. But can I just ask you, as I ask all of my guests, when it comes to writing time for you to sit down and write, where do you go? Is there a particular place or ideal situation where you go to?
Yes and no. There are several places. So I'm really lucky. I have got a study. It's actually a bedroom in our house, and my two sons are each 6'4" and grown up. And this bedroom is not much bigger than 6'4", so they grew out of the bedroom.
They learned to duck.
So I got it. So my study is wonderful. I love it, and it's a small room, and the desk looks out over the street, which can be quite inspiring because people walk to and from school, and I see all sorts of things happening in the street, which is fun. But I like writing. I like writing in cafes. I like writing when stuff is happening around about me. And I also sometimes go to Morpeth, which is a town 5 miles up the road from me. I try to do this at least once a week, although I haven't managed that recently, because in Morpeth Library, there's something called the Northern Poetry Library, which is a huge library of poetry books. And so and there's some lovely workspaces around about. So if I go there, I can sometimes, it can be an inspiring place to be, and also it's it's in a sports centre, and there's again lots going on, so that's a fun place to write. I also I did do an experiment. It lasted over a year. I run regularly, and I gave myself the task because I used to have really good ideas when I was running, and then I'd get in the shower, and by the time I got out of the shower I'd forgotten them. So I set myself the task for a year of every time I went for a run I would write a haiku, because a haiku was short enough that I could learn it and remember it by the time I got home and write it down before I had my shower. I haven't done anything with that collection of haiku yet, but there's about a year and a half. Some runs I even get 2 or 3. But that was a fun thing to do as well, to write while I was on the move. So I was writing in my head and having to remember what I'd written. That was a really good process. It helped me develop.
Now you are one of our few unique guests because, and I'll tell you the reason why. you write poems. You're a poet, so I'm assuming that poems come along as and when things fill your senses, and you're in that sort of I could do a poem, and it comes along a bit like I do with my music. You get inspired to write. So there's that. But also, you're an author, a published author, and you write stories as well. Does that mean you have several projects on the go at once? Because if you do, you're one of the few guests that we've had on the Launchpad who do that. Because most people work on a particular book or on a particular collection of poems and then publish those poems as one collection. So have you got several projects on the go at once?
Yes and no. So I have a complicated lifestyle because I've got 3 jobs, and this is one of them, and none of them have regular hours. So from week to week and month to month, I have different amounts of time to write. At the moment, I would say I've got 2 main projects on the go: a book of adult poems about the English for speakers of other language space, which is one of my jobs. I teach English to speakers of other languages. So it's about language and power, a lot of it actually, and language and connection as well. And that I've been working on that for a long time. And then I've got my children's poetry. I've got 2 children's books that I have written and haven't found a publisher. So looking for a publisher for them takes a bit of time. And then there's a project that's on the back burner precisely because it needs that kind of concentrated time. And I haven't got that kind of time at the moment. I haven't got a month where I could really crack on with that. And I know that I can't, it's quite a complicated project. It's an adult novel in verse set in the future. And I'm desperate to get on with that one, but it's not realistic. So I've kind of very sorrowfully put it aside at the moment, and I'm looking for ways of fashioning out that time. But just to come back to what you said about I write as and when I'm inspired, actually, I'm not that kind of poet. Those kind of poems come to me sometimes, but I can't just sit and look out of the window most of the time. I have to give myself some structure or some focus. In fact, I have got some poems that are based on sitting looking out of the window, but it became a project. It was like, well, I'm going to look at the sky today and notice the sky, which was a really interesting project to do. So I've always got something I like. As a musician, this might interest. So as a musician, I don't write music, I play it. And as a writer, I'm better at riffing off things than at coming up with something from nothing. So at the moment, I do what I call my scales, because I try to apply the same discipline to my writing as I do to music. And if you're a musician, it doesn't matter how good you are, you still have to do your scales. So I try and do my scales every day, and that will be different. Usually there's a little scales project going on. At the moment, I'm working with Rosen's Almanac, which is a book by Michael Rosen of interesting sayings for every day. And so I will read today's input and then use that as the starting point for doing a page of writing. And sometimes it's a page of diddly doodling, and sometimes an actual poem comes out of it. I'm a member of a group of poets online. They're fantastic children's poets. And for the last 3 years, we've done NaPoWriMo, which is National Poetry Writing Month. It's in April. And the idea is you try and draft a poem a day. And in fact, the book that's coming out came largely from that 2 years ago, because I set myself a theme that I wanted to do each to cover during that month. And that's really good discipline, because we have a WhatsApp group, and the challenge is to post your poem every day and comment on other people's. So it's a lot, but it's remarkable how a hive mind develops. And when you are even in a virtual room with other people, you're more productive, and more comes out. But I find myself more productive if I give myself a starting point rather than just sit there and think, well, what inspires me today?
Yes, the human brain is incredible tool, isn't it? I mean, we all get in it. I couldn't work like that, but that's about creativity. You know, I like
There's
to.
so many different
There's so
kinds
many
of
different.
creativity.
Absolutely, which we can get onto when we talk about creative writing, because I think that's important. So stay tuned, listeners, because we're going to be talking about the importance of creative writing, particularly with our children, our generation that are growing up now in our schools. We've got lots of different listeners, different types of listener, and you did mention about languages, and we've got lots of parents who listen, and there are a few parents who listen who have sent me an email and said that they use the podcast as a way of sort of improving their English. I'm not sure whether that should be, they should listen to me, because I'm a South London sort of a boy, you know. You need a Shakespearean actor, but for people who are trying to improve their English, is this something that would help parents who are listening?
Can be, and I think children's poetry is a really good area for helping with English. I've used children's poems, my own and other people's, in my adult ESOL classes, actually. I'll tell you a little story about that, perhaps to illustrate. Yes, I think it can be. And oddly enough, you would think culture would tell you that poetry is the most difficult form of language, that it's highfalutin and so on. And that therefore, with people who are just learning English, poetry would be the last thing they might go to. But in some ways, because poetry can be really fun, it can unlock things and it can help you make connections between things, and it can give you confidence. My ESOL students sometimes we sometimes do poetry writing exercises together. And the power of what they write when they're writing what they trying to write what they want to write, and then sharing it with each other, it gives them a lot more confidence, and it helps them to communicate with each other across their different language barriers in interesting ways. So here's an example. I can't remember what the topic was, but a poetry friend, Jacqueline Shirtliff, has a children's poem called Floordrobe. I think we were doing fast fashion. That's right. It was a fast fashion reading lesson. We had a text about fast fashion. And in the second half of the lesson, we read Jacqueline's poem, Floordrobe, which is about a very messy bedroom. And a child saying, why do I have to use the wardrobe? The floordrobe works just as well. I know where everything is, you know. And so it was very short lines. Most of the lines had just 2 words. So from a sort of structuring a sentence point of view, it wasn't that much use, but it was you had to work out what it meant in a different way than reading a prose text, and the students really got involved and enjoyed doing it. And one group of students working on this poem at the end of the lesson said, I had to explain to them that floordrobe was not a real word, except that in poetry you can use any words you want. They said, we've invented a new word as well. One of them said, I've got a sofa drobe. And I came away from that lesson thinking, if my students feel confident enough to invent words in English, that's a huge leap forward for them.
And that's creative. That's creative writing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, and I think that sort of thing in English or in literacy is just as important as a science experiment in a science lesson, because all of that makes the student think out of the box and think, actually, it's not the norm, to get away from the norm and experiment with words and with sentence construction and use that. And I think that's when poetry comes into its own, that you're not, as you so rightly said at the beginning of the podcast, it's not just about the set structure of a sentence or a paragraph that you can see in a novel. Poetry takes you on a totally different journey.
Well, all words are tools, really. And that's that's why some people are really naturally good with a lathe, and other people are really good with a trombone. So some people find the tools of words more easy than others, but learning to use those tools to help us is good for everyone, isn't it? And yeah, so that's a lot of why I love working with people, particularly with children, but with adults as well, to unlock that and to enable people to be confident enough to pick up those tools and work with them. And with a small child, you are helping them with their motor control. You give them a paintbrush and some paint, and initially it'll be a really big paintbrush, and they'll paint something, and you'll go, "Oh, that's nice. What is it?" And later, but that's a really important stage of learning to wield a pencil later in life, and learning to draw things that actually look like something that someone else would recognize. So I think it's helpful to look at words in that way, and language in that way. And if it's a tool, then yes, there are rules that you can learn that help you manipulate those tools, but you can also be creative with them, and that's just as valuable.
And I've worked with many schools over my long career, and I remember a conversation I had with one class that wasn't a particularly easy class to work with, and I was doing a story lesson with them, and I said to them, they were working against me the whole of the time, and a brave lad said to me, "I'm never going to write a book, I'm never going to write one." And I said, "But this isn't about writing a book." I said, "This is about you going for a job interview." And he said, "No, it's not." And I said, "Yes, it is." I said, "Because all words are communication. And every time you open your mouth, you're constructing a sentence. Otherwise, you'll just be talking gibberish. So if you learn to write creatively, you'll learn to talk creatively. And if you talk creatively, you'll get a nice little job with a nice little earner." And he said, "Oh, yeah, I haven't thought." And I think the penny dropped that, yes, we are teaching them to write, and we do want our children to write great stories, but it leads on to other things. It is about the motor, the skills, and all the important stuff at an early age, but it's also about saying to our teenagers, and I know some of you teenagers listen to this podcast, it's also about you and the work that you do and how you communicate. That's the great thing about stories, and the authors that we have on Launchpads. They are great communicators, and you can be a great communicator too if you learn to write creatively. We've got lots of teachers who are listening, lots of parents. Some parents home teach. They've got their child at home. What would you like to say to them, Hilary?
Oh, goodness. I'd like to say, particularly to teachers in school where there's an enormous amount of pressure to demonstrate progress that can be measured at the expense of the type of learning that is longer term and more difficult to measure. And we all know that, I think, that any time you can carve out for having fun with words is going to pay dividends, and is going to be joyous and productive time. And any way that we poets can help you with that, we are here, children's poets, keen to help with that in the best way that we can, whether it's through visits or projects or advice or even just through poems themselves. Yeah.
The for all those people who listen, our schools are struggling at the minute. All of our schools, they're struggling because they're asked to do more and more. The challenges are getting greater in regard to the children that we're having in schools. Right across the country in England, the challenges are out there, plus the fact of finances, which means that we haven't got the finances that we once used to have, and we can't get people like Hilary in. Before the show began, Hilary said, "I'd like to get into more schools," but of course, you haven't got the budgets, all you schools and all you school leaders, you haven't got the budgets to have people to come in. So if you've got a local author, a poet who's prepared to spend a little bit of time, or if you are a local poet who could help out your local school, then please consider doing that, because at the moment we're trying to avoid all sorts of things, deficits. There's lots of schools that are trying to avoid a deficit, and we need to work together. And what Hilary offers is some fantastic things.
I've got something else to say about that now that I've thought about it a bit more, which is that in my recent visits to schools, particularly, it's always been the case, but I've really noticed that words, as I said, words are tools, and in a way, when you're there, you're all about the language. But what we're also doing, what I'm also realizing that I'm doing when I'm working with a class or a group of children, and I'll say I will come and do like an assembly / performance type thing. But what I really enjoy is working in workshops with children, where children produce something themselves, either in a group or individually, or a combination. Is that what we are doing when we are creating together in the classroom or in the hall or wherever? We're learning how to be in the room together, and we're learning how to have good conversations together, and we're learning how to enjoy and appreciate each other. And all of those things are really, really important, I think, for schools now, and for children, for them developing their resilience and their ability to cope with life. And actually, I think that poetry workshops can play a small part in helping with that. Through empowering good conversations and more confidence with language, but confidence not to beat people over the head with their language, confidence to share and enjoy each other.
Now, I was at school a very, very, very long time ago, folks, as I'm often reminding you listeners. And in those days, we had lots of times to write stories. It seemed like they wanted us to write stories, and the teacher would say, right, can I hand out blank paper? Right, they're going to write a story now. You know, it's all about sentence construction and paragraph construction. We knew that, but it was about stories and whether or not you had the imagination and the flow. That's what they were looking for, creative flow. That's what my teacher was looking for, I'm sure of it. But I don't know how you feel about this next statement, whether you'd agree with it or not, Hilary, but it seems to me that we've stifled our children over the last 25, maybe even 30 years, but particularly certainly over the last 15 to 20 years, we've stifled our children because we're stopping them from coming up with the narrative. Most of them got games, computer games, or they go on their iPad or on their tablet, and they'll play games where the story is written for them. And they can go through different things. And if they want to go through different things, if they want to go through that doorway, they can. And they go through the doorway. And it seems to me that they are stifling, those sorts of things stifle children from coming out, thinking out of the box and coming out with the creative juices, because we're providing them with the narrative rather than say, well, where do you want to go with it? And I'm guessing that with your workshops, I should imagine that it's about saying, well, let's find a character and let's see where that character goes, whether that's through poetry or through a written story. Where do they go? I'm not going to tell you. You pick it. Where are you going to go? You know, and it's giving them the chance to write the story. Whereas, whether it's a Nintendo or an Xbox or whatever, the narrative is already there for them.
There's a couple of things about that. One is it's very empowering to write your own story. Last week I went to see Hamilton, and one of the last lines is, "Who lives, who dies, who tells your story?" And it really matters who tells the story. And it really matters that you get to tell your story. But the other thing is, through writing, you discover the story so often, and especially in a workshop situation. If you're writing a novel, some people will will know exactly where that novel ends and exactly all of the beats in the story before they begin to write. Not everybody writes like that, but some people do. But in a workshop situation, you very often you don't know where you're going with something. And that can be very exciting because you can discover something either about the world or about yourself. I'll give you a story for that as well, if that's okay. This is with slightly older children than the children at your school at Dogsthorpe. It was with year 5s and 6s, and we had 2 classes in the hall on this particular occasion. And it's a poem that I specifically wrote with the idea of workshopping it in mind, from Michael Rosen's idea that poetry can be a good way to help, a safe way for people to engage with emotions. So I wrote a poem with 7 stanzas in it, and it's called This Poem Is About. And each stanza is about something different. So there's a hedgehog and a daisy and a football. I don't know whether this is true in Peterborough, but certainly in the northeast of England, if you write about football, you get a lot of buy-in from children who don't think they're interested in poetry. So I wrote a stanza about a football, and this football is getting kicked around from pillar to post. It doesn't know what the rules are, and it's wondering if it will ever get to do any kicking. So we read the poem, and then each stanza is around the room on big bits of paper, and the children will go and stand next to the stanza that they're most interested in, and then they'll do some work on that stanza, some drawing work and so on, and they'll end up writing their own stanza, which they can write about anything they want. So as you can imagine, and this was in March when Newcastle United had just got to the cup final, so many children went to stand beside the football stanza. And I asked them, why are you there? Oh, they said, we love football. And I said, yeah, but would you like to be a football? And they went, oh, yeah, we'd love to be a football. And they all worked on the stanza and they enjoyed it. And they wrote their own stanza, and they were mostly about Eddie Howe or Bruno or Isaac. And that was great. They were writing what they needed to and wanted to write, and it was a safe space for them to explore and be creative. And it was 2 classes at once. I didn't have time to look at everybody's work during the workshop. And one boy, as he was on the way out, drew me aside and he said, I don't think that poem was about football. I think it was about bullying, he said. And I wrote my poem about a mobile phone. And it's a mobile phone that gets passed from person to person and dropped on the floor, and its screen gets smashed. And that just made me very excited and pleased, because often in that narrative and debate that you've been talking about screens, phones and tablets are blamed for things. And I thought it was very creative of him to have written a poem where the phone is being bullied, victim. And he was thrilled with what he'd done. Brilliant. I wasn't the only person in that class that responded to their stanza in exciting and interesting ways. And I think this speaks to something else that you said. I think that you're absolutely right about certain things for children being stifled at the moment. And one of my other jobs is I'm a lay minister in the church. And I think people's spiritual development is stifled as well. I don't think people are comfortable talking spiritually with children. And children are very hungry to talk about their spirituality, about the world, their relationship to the world, their place in the world, what they believe, what happens when difficult things happen, what gives them joy, all those things. And I find that when I am in the room doing poetry or creative writing workshops, it's spiritual work as well as writing and creative work. There's obviously a strong connection between creativity and spirituality, and whether you intend to or not, you unlock it when you're doing creative writing.
Absolutely, like music and poetry itself. It is very spiritual. Folks, as you know, I like to keep it to half an hour. We're at half an hour, but we've still got lots to discuss with Hilary. So Hilary's going to come back next week. So stay tuned, folks, and stay tuned, and we will be back with you next week when we'll be joined by Hilary again, and she's going to share some of her poems, so don't miss that. See you next week, folks.
You have been listening to the Dogsthorpe Infant School podcast. Join Captain Dave and his co-pilot Eddie Edster, the well-being dog, on another launchpad soon. Until then, dream, believe, and shine. Dogsthorpe Infant School is part of Hampton Academies Trust.